Good morning, everyone. I want to advise members that this meeting will be webcast for live or subsequent broadcast via the Council's meeting YouTube site, and that members of the press or public may record and take photographs except where they are confidential or exempt items. So, second item on the agenda today is appointment of committee and chair. To note the committee's membership for the current municipal year as agreed by City Council. Third item on the agenda is apologies. Have we had any apologies? Is there any apologies?
Apologies for Captain.
Noted, thank you. Declarations of interest. Members are reminded that they must declare all relevant pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests arising from any business to be discussed at this meeting. If a disclosable pecuniary interest is declared, a member must not speak or take part in the item agenda. Any declarations will be recorded in notes of the meeting. Anyone have any interest to declare? Move on to item 5, terms of reference. This sets out the committee's remit and are for noting. Item 6, election of deputy chair. Can members formally agree the nomination of Councillor Chaman Lal to deputy chair and to substitute as chair in my absence?
Agreed.
Okay. Item 7, notes of the last meeting dated March the 24th. The committee's last formal meeting was in March, so in light of this, can I ask that the committee agrees the actions from the meeting that took place remotely on Teams during the pandemic, and that we were agreed in Teams meetings can be signed physically by the deputy chair, Councillor Chaman Lal, due to the previous chair having since left the authority. Agreed. Item 8. So East Birmingham Inclusive Growth Strategy Update. I'd like to welcome Mark Gamble, East Birmingham Development Manager, who last gave an update to the committee on the strategies consultation in March. Thank you, Mark. Mark has prepared a presentation that has been circulated, and I will ask him to highlight the key points before we move to questions and discussion. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Chair. So as the Chair said, this is my update since my last report to this committee in March. I'll cover the key items of progress in the interim. I do have some slides which will appear as I talk. There may be a disconnect between what I'm talking about and what appears on the screen due to the vagaries of the internet, so I apologise for any confusion this caused. Just as a brief recap, before I update on recent progress on what the East Birmingham Inclusive Growth Agenda is all about. East Birmingham is part of the East Birmingham North Solihull Inclusive Growth Corridor, which is a joint commitment of Birmingham City Council, Solihull Council and the West Midlands Combined Authority. What sets East Birmingham apart is that it has a combination of need in terms of very significant levels of deprivation, but also a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The growth and opportunities coming from HS2 in particular, and the major regeneration and development that will be happening at Curzon in the city centre and around the NEC and the airport, associated with the new high-speed 2 stations, creates a huge opportunity for improving the prosperity of the area, and that's what this agenda is designed to address. The Council's response to this challenge is encapsulated in the East Birmingham Inclusive Growth Strategy. That's a document that we pulled together with the input of many partners, including the Combined Authority and the whole Council, over the course of 2019. That was published in public consultation in 2020. Unfortunately, just at the start of lockdown, we had to be quite creative in the way that we worked around the challenge that posed in terms of engaging with the community in particular. And in the end, we consulted for a total of 8 months on that and continue to engage now. The Inclusive Growth Strategy was agreed by Cabinet earlier this year, and since then we've been working on moving it forward towards implementation. The strategy is set aside a little from previous growth strategies that the council's published in that it has a broader scope. It includes a focus on the infrastructure and development interventions that are needed to move forward the area and deliver economic growth and physical improvement. But there's also a real focus on the delivery of local services, the local economy and businesses, and a more holistic approach to regeneration. So the approach of the inclusive growth strategy is informed by the council's wider approach to inclusive growth. And just to clarify what we mean by that, it's about ensuring that the benefits of growth are shared more fairly. So we want to use the opportunities that I've mentioned as a way of reducing inequality and specifically targeting the needs of the people in East Birmingham who most require support. The things that characterise the approach and which informed the development of the strategy and also the work that will follow on are set out in the slide. It's about a comprehensive multi-agency approach. So it's not just the council's approach, it's our approach with our partners, but also stakeholders in the widest sense. We have a commitment to work with the community, with organisations on the ground, and with everybody who is doing anything that affects East Birmingham. It's also about using some of the more traditional tools in our toolbox, development, infrastructure, as catalysts for delivering socio-economic outcomes. So community wealth building is really important, making the community more resilient and more empowered, but also supporting agendas like our response to climate change and delivering a just transition to zero carbon. I've mentioned the importance of the community and stakeholders, including the voluntary, community, and social enterprise sectors. I hope you'll forgive the acronym on the slide, that's what it stands for. And it's in alignment with an overall approach focused on prevention and early intervention. The theory there being that if we can make changes that affect people's lives, particularly when they're young, then you can improve the entire course of their future life for the better. And a small amount of investment early on can make a much bigger difference than a comparatively large investment later on. So I'll just cover some of the key things that have happened over the past few months, and then I'll expand on some of them in the future slides. So, as I mentioned, the Inclusive Growth Strategy was adopted by Cabinet on the 9th of February. There was a meeting of the East Birmingham Board on the 14th of May this year. I can cover the East Birmingham Board on a subsequent slide, but the focus of that meeting was about a strategic levelling up approach to East Birmingham and North Solihull. There was a meeting of the East Birmingham Board Members Forum that looked at the papers that had gone to the East Birmingham Board, and there was a parallel discussion there, but there was also some focus on more local issues, such as the ward planning agenda, localism, and the Celebrating Communities Grants Programme. Finally, on the 23rd of July this year, a programme business case was approved for the implementation of the Inclusive Growth Strategy. The business case is appended to my report. So to expand on some of those points, so first of all, the East Birmingham programme. As I've outlined, this is the council's next step in terms of implementing the Inclusive Growth Strategy. You can look at the business case yourself for the detail, but fundamentally, what we asked for was approval to establish a team. So up until this point, it's been very limited resources allocated. So this is more or less just me. So the programme business case allows us to build a team and to maintain that team over the next 3.5 years. And the main focus of what that team will do will be building business cases, making grant funding applications, developing partnerships, to move forward all the many and varied things that we said that we will do in the Inclusive Growth Strategy. There are various things that are necessary to underpin all of that. So we'll be thinking about, well, how do we monitor our impact? How do we understand East Birmingham better? And there is a work stream focused on policy and research. There's also an ongoing and intensive community engagement and involvement work stream as well. As per one of the bullets on the slide, one of the objectives over that funding period for the programme team is that we will find ways of allowing us to scale. So the council's initial commitment to this is about £3.6 million. £3.6 million is a really, really useful investment. It will allow us to do a great deal. But in the scale of the challenge, to regenerate an area with a population of 250,000 people, it can only be the starting point. So we need to take that and use it as leverage to set up something that can be much larger and also hopefully self-sustaining, so that actually we can use it as a way of improving the council's financial position and allowing us to really invest in the area going forward. I think I've mentioned some of the programme principles that are on this slide already. Just to rattle through some of these. The holistic approach, I think, is really important. So this is about intervening in anywhere that's necessary. We're not restricting ourselves to a particular topic or work area. This is a very, very broad-based programme. And within the council, I think we'll be looking to work between the directorates as a matter of course, and externally, particularly with public sector partners to begin with, but also the private sector and community organisations going forward. We want to be looking at various different scales in parallel. So I'll talk in a minute about the proposal we took to the East Birmingham board for the large-scale levelling up agenda. But we're also engaged with lots of organisations on the ground, and we're having conversations about very local issues, things where the scale of expenditure might be comparatively small, and only a few people are involved. But what we want to do through this work is to be linking all the different levels, micro, meso, macro, because fundamentally what the programme's about is linking that local level with the kind of big strategic changes that are happening in the area. East Birmingham is a place where the council can do things different. We can try things, we can do pathfinders, and that will inform our approach to the rest of the city. And as I've mentioned, it's also somewhere we can find new ways of investing in the community and stimulating the development of community assets and community enterprise. To give you a flavour of some of the work that's already in progress, in advance of the programme business case, we were able to mobilise a total of 8 projects set out in the report and in more detail in the business case. I won't go through them all in detail, but I do want to say, Chair, that already that package of projects is addressing various different themes. So we're looking at some development infrastructure challenges. We're also working on transport and connectivity, research and policy, and we have several projects which are also designed to improve the way that we work with the community. We're also working closely in collaboration with other corporate objectives and programmes, so particularly the Route to Zero programme, digital inclusion, as per report just a few weeks ago, and the council's overall COVID-19 strategy. A recap on the East Birmingham board, which I think I described as committee in March, but just in advance of me talking about the paper that went to the East Birmingham board. The board was established in 2020 to provide a forum for discussing the partnership issues that we need to work through in order to work more closely, but also to amplify our voice and to give us increased lobbying power in terms of the East Birmingham and wider East Birmingham North Solihull growth area. So we took a paper to the East Birmingham board in May, which was focused really on what the big opportunities are in East Birmingham and North Solihull, and it set out an idea for how we can try and address those things in a joined up way in order to achieve more. So the elements specifically that are currently on the radar for East Birmingham and North Solihull are the transformation of connectivity, so high speed 2 goes without saying, but there are also plans and have been plans for some years for East Birmingham to Solihull, metro extension, improvements to heavy rail, there is the sprint rapid transit schemes, and by bringing those things together and combining the business case for some of those elements with the wider package of work, we think that can provide better outcomes. Similarly, there are proposals for a health and innovation campus at Arden Cross, potentially including a new hospital. That would require a very large business case in its own right, and linking that in with the transport solution that would connect that with the population it would serve, which seems to make a lot of sense. And then how we link those things in with the strategic development opportunities, such as at Birmingham Wheels, in the area action plan area, Curzon and Digbeth and UK Central Arden Cross. As I've mentioned, that has the potential to act as a catalyst in order to enable some of this wider work. And then where the really inclusive growth delivery comes in is taking those elements and linking them directly in with the training, skills and employment agenda, and also underpinning all that with some intensive working with local communities to ensure that they're empowered to shape this work and benefit from it. I do have a slide for each of those things, which I'll go through quickly, if that's okay, Chair. I think it's the discussion at board was about the various ways that this could move forward. And I think it's fair to say that one of the key things that would be required to join up some of these business cases and some of these major interventions is a commitment to collaborate. That the parties that sit on the East Birmingham board will need to be working closely together so that we can tease out the opportunities for collaboration, partnership, for joint investment, and for combining some of these strategic priorities in order to improve the viability of all of these proposals. I mentioned Arden Cross. I said that there is a potential for a new hospital as part of that development. It's an incredibly strategically located place, being close to the new high-speed 2 station. It would also benefit from the new metro link that would connect it directly through the centre of East Birmingham and into Birmingham city centre. There is also the wider linked agenda with that. The NHS at the moment is considering how it provides its services, how some services, for example, might move out of hospitals into the local community. So as well as looking at new hospitals, it's about, will some of those activities be part of the mix in terms of regenerating our local centres? Could we have shared service hubs on our high streets? Transformation of connectivity, I think I've mentioned the key points. There is a piece of work underway at the moment looking at the East Birmingham North corridor. So many things have changed over the past few years, and particularly during the pandemic. But what is clear is that there is a need to provide people in the corridor with much better transport links. One of the major obstacles in people's way at the moment, which makes it difficult for them to benefit from good education, good employment opportunities, and also something that seriously affects people's health, is the current transport infrastructure in the area and the implications for travel times and air quality and so on. Business employment skills was a really big issue for East Birmingham even prior to COVID. It's a major strategic issue for the city, as you all know. Where it fits in with the levelling up agenda is that there's an opportunity for us to make some direct links between the big strategic investments and this agenda. So some of that is about the high streets work, about how local businesses can be helped to be more resilient, to come back from the pandemic, to find new opportunities and create good quality jobs. Some of it is also about the way that we can use our power as an employer and that of our partners to create pathways into good quality jobs. And there's some really good work being done through the Anchor Institutions Network, looking at how that can happen. So what we're proposing is joining all that up and linking it in with the big investments. Development is a catalyst. It's a way of deriving value and finance from land and assets, and also improving the places. East Birmingham is not a place where we have huge development sites, with the exception of one or two, specifically Wheels and around the new HSC rolling stock depot. But nevertheless, associated with the local centres and linking in with some of the big strategic work at the UK Central, then there's a real opportunity here to unlock some value and for us to be proactive in the way that we move forward our property agenda, our development agenda, to deliver benefit for local people and to enable some of the other elements of the overall plan. So just to finish my presentation, Chair, the next steps for the East Birmingham programme are as follows. Following the Cabinet approval, we're now in a position to mobilise the programme team. The practical next step there is improving securing the internal approvals to go out for recruitment, and then the recruitment process, and getting the team spun up so that we can have people addressing a far wider range of projects than we've been able to mobilise so far. There are some projects that are already in progress at the moment. We'll be moving those forward and looking to build on some of the work that's already been done. And as the new team comes online, we want to accelerate those because there's the potential for the basis for future bids into levelling up fund, and for us to be building business cases on the back of the work that's already taken place. There will be an ongoing work stream of project development. So we'll be working with partners, we'll be looking at research and policy and what that's telling us about what we need to do. And always, on an ongoing basis, we'll be working with local members and the community to understand what our priorities need to be on the ground. And we'll be developing new project proposals so that we have a continuous pipeline of work coming forward in this space. In many cases, those will require business cases and also external funding. And then underpinning all of that is the programme facilitation. So I've mentioned the East Birmingham Board, I've mentioned the Ward Members Forum. We have outside of the projects focused on community development engagement, we also have maintained the momentum we've built up during engagement on the strategy, and we'll be continuing as much as we possibly can to constantly expand our reach into the community and to be making sure that within that enormous population, which is very diverse, that as many people as possible are speaking to us, they know who we are, we're helping them, and we're also ensuring that their voices are featured in our reporting back to Cabinet and to this committee. And I should mention that from a programme management point of view, there'll be annual reports to Cabinet. We can report to this committee on demand. And the programme paperwork will be made available as well. So in between updates, you'll be able to track the progress of projects and manage the programme. So that's all my slides, Chair. I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. So now if anyone's got any questions, yes, Councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Simon Round, Franklin Grove Park Ward, North constituency. Firstly, welcome back, Mark. Always enjoy your presentations. Just want to say I like the use of pictures. It's very often death by PowerPoint on this committee, so I do notice that you've put into them, so thank you for that. I always talk about skills and jobs and what we do in terms of outreach and who we're targeting for the employment opportunities. Often with big construction products, we have agencies that advertise across the country, as we have busloads of people coming in from further afield. I'd like to know, I've asked you about this before, but I'd like to expand on it again. What we're doing to target this to residents in Birmingham, and in particular in the south where I represent. I know this is East Birmingham development. I think everybody in Birmingham should benefit from the opportunities. You mentioned digital inclusion, so I'm very passionate about, and like to expand on that. And what are we doing to encourage more people, especially the old generation, to get access to their laptops after their last year of COVID? It's been like more important than ever. I don't think we should stop being coached because we're coming out the other side of COVID. We should be doubling down on that. And finally, something I'm going to talk quite a bit on is Birmingham Wheels. You might notice that City Council yesterday, Conservative Group, were very passionate to support the Birmingham Wheels campaign, and I wanted to know if you're aware of the Birmingham Wheels vision. That because you did just say you wanted to work with the local community and make sure local government are being heard. A lot of people use that site, and what the owners of the site have now come up with is a proposal that actually uses half the land for warehousing. So the jobs from the development and the development would be there, but then they consolidate half of the site to become an innovative sports facility, including which I really like, a skateboarding park, which if you've been watching the Olympics, you'll know Sky Brown won a bronze medal in skateboarding. This is a purpose-built park skate track, which I think would be absolutely fantastic for the second city. And if I just hold it up to show community members what it is. So all of this at the moment land is Birmingham Wheels, and they want to consolidate everything up on the top And in the bottom bit of the land, this will be all the warehousing. Benefit you have from that, you have the innovative sport, motorsports, go-karting, rallying, skateboarding. The only purpose-built inline skateboarding track as well in the country, which has created world championships, medal holders, which is fantastic. That will be a real thing to do. And what you do is you create an incentive for people in the automotive, in the urban sports areas, to want to use these facilities, and they can work with one another. So not only are you creating jobs and employment, you're also creating opportunities to keep kids off the streets, for them to learn new skills and opportunities. And of course, let's not forget, Birmingham, we are a motor city. We have a strong heritage. So to move this out of Birmingham, which under the Birmingham Development Plan, the council is obliged to do so, that would cost the taxpayer millions and the council millions. So a much better solution would be to just consolidate the whole thing. You can have the jobs below, you can have the sport. It's a win-win scenario. I do think that the council needs to put more effort into it, to speaking to the local community about this, because I think that would be the best solution. Thank you, Chair.
Mark, would you like to answer now, or would you want to take some more questions? Or?
By all means, Chair, I can start answering the next questions. In terms of skills and employment, it's early days at the moment for East Birmingham because, as I've explained, we're still very much mobilising. I think as the team comes on stream and we have the capacity to do so, we'll be looking at various different opportunities to match up jobs, employment, and skills potential in East Birmingham, particularly coming through our interventions and those of our partners with local people. We put together a bid for community renewal fund earlier in the year, which wasn't successful, unfortunately, but it was based on some of the principles I talked about coming out of the work of the Anchor Institutions Network. We've established something we're referring to as the East Birmingham Community Anchor Network, and that's focused on creating clear pathways into jobs for the people in the most deprived communities. And there's a lot of different moving parts in terms of how people become aware of opportunities, how they are provided the opportunity for them to be eligible, and then also about how we do our workforce planning, how we make our opportunities accessible, and how we're proactive in the way that we match them up. So we're starting work on that, but we certainly don't have a finished article at the moment. When we look at, or when we talk about business cases for things like the East Birmingham to North Solihull Metro, one of the things I think that the East Birmingham board can add value is by ensuring that any business case of that kind very robustly answers the question of how the opportunities coming out of investment like that will be anchored in the local community. And we don't just mean East Birmingham, citywide. So hopefully that's gives you a little bit more to be going on. I think when I come back next time, I should be able to tell you a bit more about specific projects and some work that we're doing to address that. Regarding digital inclusion, once again, the digital inclusion strategy and action plan is fresh from Cabinet. I was speaking to a colleague yesterday about this and discussing how the East Birmingham programme team can be working with the officers who will be leading on the digital inclusion agenda, and how we can make sure that East Birmingham is at the forefront of that work. So I'm aware that there are proposals at the moment, for example, to make refurbished laptops available, but I think we can go well beyond that. And as you say, the agenda isn't just about improving skills. There's also the question of isolation and older people. So it's very much on the radar, and there will be projects within the programme addressing that moving forward. Finally, on Birmingham Wheels, I'm not the lead for the Birmingham Wheels project, and I wasn't aware of the proposal that I'll be very interested to read it. The business case for the wheel site is being developed at the moment, and we're always listening, and we'll certainly be able to take that into account. In terms of how we respond to that and through what channel, then I would have to go and to ask some colleagues about that, but I can certainly come back to the committee to tell you where we are with that and in what way we'll be.
One very quick brief point, not a question. You mentioned with the skills and figuring out ways to signpost. Actually, we have changed approach. Frank the Skills Show is happening on the 26th. So if you know anybody who would like it completely free of charge for a stand, it's at the Hollywood Community Centre, Sunday the 26th of September, 10 a.m. till 3 p.m. And I'll hold up to the cameras and you can have some lyrics. And that's for all members as well. If anybody who'd be interested to attend, please do that in there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Higgins.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I thought it was really interesting. There's only two sort of small questions with some points from me. Is firstly, you talked about like tram and ensuring connectivity. To what extent will there be a kind of assurance that as well as East Birmingham being connected with the city centre, that it's actually connected with other parts of the city as well? I think the one thing that always strikes me about the key difference between Birmingham and London is where in London you can get to pretty much anywhere in about the same amount of time, regardless of where you are. Birmingham, whilst it's relatively easy to get from anywhere to the city centre, it's not often easy to get from one suburb to another or one community to another. I think like where I live, for example, it's about a 15-minute drive from Northfield to Moseley, but to get there on public transport can take like over an hour. Yeah. Yeah, it's just something to be aware of, and if there are any sort of has been a look into that. The second thing is you talked about obviously kind of like community engagement and making sure that the on side of that. Is there a plan at the moment to get schools involved in that? And a particularly thing that I think about when I was at school and they built a factory youth centre in Longridge. They had members like children from a number of the local schools who got to actually kind of like design it and be involved in the setting up of that. And I think that doing that at school is one of the reasons I ended up as a councillor today, because it kept me sort of interested in my community and wanting to serve my community. So again, something that I think would be worth looking at if you haven't already. Thank
you, Councillor. Mark, would you like to respond?
Yeah, by all means. I think the issue of north-south movement in the East Birmingham corridor is a really important one. And I'm growing up here myself. I've spent many hours at bus stops with the consequence of some of those journeys being far more difficult. I think the arterial route, depending on time of day, can work reasonably well. But it is quite shocking, actually, just how disconnected some parts of East Birmingham are from the rest of the city, but even other parts of their own locality. So yes, it's a very important issue. And it's one of the reasons, rather than just pushing for the East Birmingham Solihull Metro to happen, which really provides another east-west article, we're also looking at the wider corridor. And I think, obviously, there's many cues in the Birmingham Transport Plan for how we genuinely expect to move things forward and improve matters. But specifically in East Birmingham, there is a co-funded study at the moment looking at the East Birmingham North Solihull corridor. And it's looking at that as a whole rather than a need to move between Curzon and Solihull. So we're very, very conscious about that kind of wider connectivity and making sure we don't end up with one really good opportunity that's no good at all if you live in. So yes, very, very high on the agenda. As far as schools involvement goes, I think that also it's on the list. It was very difficult for us to connect the schools in the consultation, although we did try. Moving forward, over the next few months, I wanted to engage with colleagues in skills and education to think about how we might do that. So we have links in with some local colleges, for example. But what I'd like to see is the kind of things you refer to, some focused work in schools to provide topics or projects that the children can be interested in, and maybe also linking with the viewpoint pathways, the skills children have been talking about. And there's some good conversations I've seen about the pre-need agenda. So young people who are at risk in a couple of years of leaving school and falling off the radar from an employment point of view, how we can engage them early when they're 13, 14. And I think there's some really big opportunities there, but we have to do it right. And I think we have to understand a little bit about how to engage successfully. So what I'd like to do is to take some advice from the right people and look at how we can make the programme's engagement as accessible, as interesting and engaging as possible, and that we're taking the schools along with us.
Thank you. Yeah, Councillor.
Thank you. I know we wait for the bigger picture, right? At the moment, in the meantime, I come to one of there's a lot of decoration in that area already, right? And some of the children are really not achieving the right level of education they're getting ready for, and a lot of people are scared up for. So rather than waiting for big things to happen, we should be doing something now to get them ready, right? They're already missing out anyway. So I think we should it's our obligation as a policy to make sure that children are leveled up, the people are leveled up, so that they already have the capacity, the adequate the skills for taking up the opportunity to ever now, right? Rather than just, failing to make we are going to bigger gap anyway. It's something we need to close the gap rather than spend too much time on consultations while we aren't really dealing with the real issues and causes of low earnings, low skills, and other things. Okay, and more and other outcomes which we should be dealing with now. Thank you.
Mark, did you want to respond?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd entirely agree with the councillor. I think we have the strategic and big picture things like the metro, like the long-term investment, high speed too. But having spent a lot of time talking to people and explaining those things are some way away, they're quite abstract, and particularly in the perspective of the last couple of years, and the great difficulties that's caused for so many people. There's an absolute obligation for us to act as quickly as possible. So that's part of the reason that we've established some projects in advance of the programme, because there are opportunities to do so. We have various funding bids. We were able to get things moving, and we want to build on that as quickly as possible. It's also part of the reason that I mentioned that we want to be working on all levels. So whereas we don't want to lose sight of the big multi-million investments and the overall kind of very long-term macro investment, any work we can do at any scale is worthwhile. And if it's affecting people's lives now, then that's a good use of investment, a good use of time. So we are trying to reconcile all those different levels of activity, but we're definitely not resting on our laurels at the moment. The business case is signed off, we're recruiting the team, but while all that's happening, we are getting on with some of the things that we started. And I think the East Birmingham Community Anchor Network I mentioned is a good example of something that we've set in motion and it's starting to gain life of its own. So a lot of organisations in the area that are coming to the table and doing things that are working with us. And some of that activity might not have been happening if we'd have waited until after the business case.
I'm not actually being put on the HS2 related job opportunity, and my friend that we got the railway college down the road, and there was some issue that there weren't many local students enrolled on the academy. Do you have an update? Because that's where we want to start with local students taking up getting ready for the HS2 communities.
I'm afraid I don't have an update on that, but it's certainly something where I think we need to aspire to be doing better than we do. At risk of going off at a tangent, there's another piece of work. We're working with West Midlands Police on a targeted recruitment campaign for BMI people in partnership with Pioneer. There are things we can be doing to be ensuring the local uptake of skills and training opportunities is better. We're starting some of that work now, but I think there's a lot more to be done. But working with local education institutions, I think, is really important. We have a project as well on the list, a collaboration with Birmingham City University, which is designed to improve the way we engage with communities and young people particularly, but it's also about ensuring that some of the opportunities provided by Birmingham University and the other institutions are accessible by people in the most deprived parts of East Birmingham. So we're starting work on that, but there's definitely a lot to do. And I hope that we'll be able to show some outputs over the next few months and years.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome to the committee, Chair. Mark, nice to have you back again. Great presentation. Councillor Livia comes more here. So I'm from the east of Birmingham. I represent Small Heath Ward. The adjacent areas, Bosley Green, Allen parts of the Arden, these are deprived areas in the city. We have low rates of unemployment. And there's a number of plans I'm aware in terms of we have the Bosley Green, the metro scheme that's proposed in the it's in the regeneration plan. At the moment, we're having development of the Small Heath Highway, which is proposed bus route is a bendy bus to connect Birmingham to Solihull. I think that work has been going on for over a year now since COVID began. I think some of my residents are up in Mountain because it's taking up a lot of time and we have restricted access to the highway. The generation is there. I think it's been quite really raised by my colleagues Alex and then Councillor Down as well, that as councillors, what we'd like to see is what benefit the council and the money that's going towards these projects is being taken up by the local youth, and in terms of what work and active involvement we can bring communities with. We've had a number of projects in the past where we've had companies come around and do various work, but we see that local people or kids who are coming out of colleges or university don't necessarily benefit from that. And I think with the onset of COVID now, the type of unemployment rates we have, the type of impact that COVID has had on the local economy as well as people within the community. I think that's what's on our mind, that we need to do a bit more as a council, as local government. I know we have connections with various colleges. One thing you're talking about, I can give you an example. Last weekend on Friday, I was at the Bengal Street Mosque in Small Heath. And after the Friday prayers, they made an announcement that the HS2 project is meeting local engineers. So when I went outside, there was a stand, but they were handing out leaflets. It was one of the colleges that was handing out leaflets. But you see, if you're not at the mosque locally, you're not enrolled in a college as a young student, then you may not hear about it. If you haven't gone on the council website, you may not hear about it. So I think maybe as local, if the local council has certain initiatives in terms of advertising, what local projects are going on, what involvement they need of people of different age and categories, is something which the councillors, local councillors can come on board and we can start promoting these projects and the benefits of them to a local community as well as the people that they can help serve. It's not very much a question, I suppose, it's more of a comment really in terms of something you keep in mind. Because there are a lot of projects. As mentioned earlier by my friends, we have the HS2, we've got the airport. The airport has expanded. Let's hope it expands further into the future. And then we have Solihull, plus beyond that we have Coventry. So it's about regenerating Birmingham, but also how we make Birmingham as a larger regional hub for places like Coventry, Solihull to come into. Ultimately, that's our aim because we are the largest city in the region. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Mark. Do you want to?
Yes, I'll have a few remarks on that. I think in terms of the disruption caused by infrastructure projects. I think that it can be incredibly frustrating for local people. Something that we can do to offset that, because it obviously can't be prevented, unfortunately, is to make the link between the activity and the benefits to the community more obvious. And things like employment opportunities are part of that, but also just communicating better and more thoroughly. And I think that your point about the various circles people moving is a really important one. During the consultation, we tried to go through organisations as possible in order to reach communities and groups that we might not reach by putting something on the website or having meetings. I had some really good conversations with the guys in Green Lake Mosque, for example. We talked to lots of traders associations and various different groups of all kinds. And as we start to bring forward projects that affect particular areas, those links that we've made, we want to use as a way of communicating. And partly it's about, as I explain, what's going on and why in the long run it will be a good thing. But I think specifically when we're talking about opportunities, it's also absolutely essential in terms of making sure that more people are going to be aware of what's coming in the pipeline. And I think comms in general is something that we can, we want to be constantly focusing on. In terms of East Birmingham's role in the region, I think we've got some big assets in East Birmingham. And one of the exciting things for me is that at Tyseley Energy Park, we've got a location of national, if not international significance in terms of the low and zero carbon industries sector. And I think developing East Birmingham as a place for that sector particularly, and creating job opportunities linked with things like housing retrofit is also something we're looking at very seriously with the Route to Zero team. We had an inception meeting yesterday with partners at Tyseley Energy Park to start some work there, looking at exactly that, how we can get the absolute best out of that opportunity over the next few years by working together. And that's something where we're bridging between public and private sector, and working very closely also with Birmingham University on that. So we are trying to work on all those things. But just to finish off, I will say that in terms of the role of ward members, this is one of the reasons we're very keen to ensure that we establish the ward members forum, because it's an opportunity to have discussions with local councillors, but also to make sure that we're communicating to and through local councillors, and to ensure that all the networks that are linked on are benefiting from our messages.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And just before we sort of move on to the next item, then just a couple of points that I wanted to make is in terms of engagement with schools. I know, schools in my ward, a lot of them have got school councils, and children from an early age are really engaged. I think you'd be quite surprised, because I've been out to a lot of schools in my ward, and the way that children are engaged in issues such as the environment and what's happening around them, it's quite surprising, even from primary school. So that might be, I know definitely the schools in my ward that I visited, they've all got school councils. So that might be some way of kind of getting into, schools. And I think because this is like a long-term plan that we're trying to do here, these are the children whose lives are going to be affected. So if we can kind of get even their views from from an early age, that would be brilliant. The other thing is, from my experience of working in the employment sector, I know there's a massive shortage in the construction industry, the skills industry, and especially I've done a lot of work around women in construction. I think it'd be really interesting, obviously not nowadays, this is something that we could maybe look at, because we are growing as a city, and it'd be really interesting if we look at how we get that skills shortage for children in Birmingham, so we can get them into these construction jobs. So that was it, Mark. So you don't have to answer if you don't want to. We can pick this up at maybe another time. It's just a couple of points I wanted to make.
I'll just very briefly, Chair. I think if engaging with schools as we discussed, I think it's very, very important. I think school counsellors, so my children's school, they even need co-counsel as well. So I think there are things that if we can get our communication right. So I'd like to look at them to get some packs that schools can use for, as part of their syllabus, perhaps, and have a discussion about this. I mean, one of the opportunities there is to help young people grow up in the area, so like it's their area, and the council isn't just doing things to them, they're listening to them, they have influence over what goes on, and maybe they can aspire to continue that relationship as they go. In terms of construction skills, just to note one thing where Eastern is quite lucky in is that we have the construction training facility at South City College, Birmingham, which is quite an unusual facility, I think. And they have there's an opportunity there, I think, to really build on that this year. It's already been an asset in relation to the high-speed 2 project. So definitely there's room for us to explore that. But I think particularly the issue of women in construction, it's not something that I've looked at before, and I'll be very keen to talk through with you in future opportunities with that.
Thank you, so. So we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is an update on Brexit. So we've got Lloyd Broad, who's the head of European Affairs, joining us.
Where is it?
It's going to be joining us online. And and Oscar. Oscar is interim Brexit coordinator. So they'll be joining us remotely via Teams. Oscar is going to share a presentation with us today, and that should have been sent out yesterday to members. So Oscar is going to take us through the main points, and then I'll open it up to questions from members. So Oscar,
Thank you, Chair. And firstly, apologies to members that this is a hybrid discussion, and I hope the sound quality and the presentation doesn't create too many difficulties in terms of the key messages we wish to deliver here. I suppose the first comment is similar to Mark, and if there is a slight delay and a lag on the slides, the words and the images, apologies for that, but hopefully you have the slide deck with you to help the process here. And also don't be too concerned that you have a slide deck with over 30 slides. I promise you that we will not be going through 30 slides with you. We will be raising the key issues that we would wish to raise with you. We haven't spoken on Brexit with the committee for about 12 months. So there's a number of things to go through. We'll do it in 15 minutes or so, and hopefully you'll have plenty of time for questions. In summary, the presentation will cover 6 key items. It will give you a state of play on the Brexit timeline. Obviously, since the last time we spoke, we have formally left the European Union. We have a withdrawal agreement and a trade and cooperation agreement. We will cover some of the sectoral impacts of that agreement in the West Midlands, some issues around imports and exports. The main item we would wish to cover today is the work that we've been doing on citizens and on the EU settlement scheme. We'll cover EU funding and cover what the priorities will be over the next 6 months. Hopefully this is all okay so far, but I'll hand over to Osgay to start with the detail.
Thank you very much, Lloyd. So I thought it would be good to start to have an overview on the Brexit timeline and the key deadlines we've had in 2021 and what we're expecting for the rest of the year and 2022. So this is just a snapshot of the of 2021 and 2022, but based on the agreement we've got with the EU, the timeline actually goes until 2028. So just to give an idea how complex and actually complicated it still is. So in 2021, especially in June, we had a number of important deadlines which had a big impact on businesses, citizens, and also on local authorities. So one of them was obtaining the data adequacy decision to make sure that the GDPR compliance was secured and the data flow between the EU and the UK could continue. And again, in June, we also had the deadline to end the EU free movement and the application, and for the EU citizens living in the UK, the application for the EU settlement scheme, which is a new scheme developed by the Home Office specifically, based on Brexit, to protect the rights of the EU citizens to continue to live and work in the UK. And this year we were actually expecting some other very important key milestones, but the government just published actually the new timeline on the import controls yesterday. So I included it also on the slides this morning. So and as we all know, everything that affects the trade has also an impact on our services, on trading standards and environmental health teams. So if we look at the sectoral impact, then we see that the key challenges and the risks are around the new standards and regulations and customs paperwork and the increasing prices and costs and skills shortages for a number of the key sectors in the West Midlands. And if we look closer at the different sectors, we see again in areas like manufacturing and engineering, transport and logistics, and arts and entertainment, we see these issues of customs declarations and increasing prices, border delays, and also skills shortages as repeating issues that these businesses have to deal with. And according to the LEP's latest assessment, again, there are a number of other areas as well, sectors as well, that are facing the medium risk, which are the construction, retail, energy, low carbon, tourism and creative industries, so which are actually also very important for the economic recovery after the COVID crisis. So at the moment, it's also very difficult to understand the concrete impact of Brexit and the COVID. So, but of course, when planning ahead, we need to take all of that into consideration, and especially considering that, the timeline that we briefly discussed at the beginning, and the moving target in relation to preparations and the new rules and regulations and border checks. And here on this slide, you can see the new timeline that was published by the government yesterday in terms of the import controls of live animals and products of animal origin. So this is mainly food related, and of course the concerns around them and around the disruptions and the food shortages. So therefore, the government decided to put another delay of 4 to 6 months on the upcoming deadlines to implement and start conducting import controls. So this has, of course, also an impact on our services, and as the council, we've been monitoring this closely to be ready and to make sure that all the relevant teams are trained, well resourced, and operational when when the deadlines hit. However, it's been, of course, a challenge as the deadlines kept being pushed, and of course the same services also had a lot of additional workload workload due to the COVID crisis. So, but we're still closely monitoring all of that and making the necessary preparations. So we see two main areas where there will be more workload coming, which one of them will be trading standards to ensure the necessary market surveillance and the checks are conducted, and also for the exporters of meat and fishery products, they will need export health certificates. And to protect the businesses from high fees, we're also in the recruitment process of a new official veterinary surgeon to start providing this service. However, there is a countrywide skills shortage, which is again a challenge for everyone in this field. In addition to that, we also work closely with the relevant government departments, with combined authority, chambers, and growth hubs, and also LEPs, to make sure that we monitor all the developments well and prepare accordingly. In addition to that, of course, the international visibility and cooperation and networks are also very important for Birmingham. Therefore, all our activities with the Eurocities and Birmingham Alliance and also international trade and networking activities are still also ongoing to make sure that the post-Brexit trade environment and cooperations among the cities are ensured. As Lloyd said, so we would like to focus also a lot on the impact on citizens and the EU settlement scheme and the work we've been doing on this area. So as the application deadline was the 30th of June, and now there are different levels of impact that we see in relation to having the rights or keeping the rights to live and work in the UK, and of course all the proof and the evidence that the EU citizens need to provide in terms of to prove that their right to work in the UK, and of course their access to benefits. So until the 30th of June, it was enough for the EU citizens just to provide their passports to prove their right to live and work in the UK. But from the 1st of July on now, we're facing 4 different status types within the framework of the EU settlement scheme, so which is the settled status, pre-settled status, certificate of application, and no immigration status. So there is a backlog of 500,000 applications nationwide. So the Home Office has a backlog to issue the status, even though the EU citizens are eligible for it. And if we look at Birmingham, so we've got the latest data we've got from the Home Office is from March 2021, and we can see that the backlog there is around 10,000. And if we look at the data again and see the progress in Birmingham, we can see again the negative impact of the lockdown and how actually the applications slow down. And the main challenge in the whole process is that across the country, and also we see the same pattern in Birmingham as well, there are much more applications and more EU citizens and their family members who need to apply to this scheme compared to what was reported in the national statistics. So this is a big challenge for Birmingham as well as for the Home Office, and it's an issue countrywide. As mentioned, so from the 1st of July on, all employers need to check the status and right to work of the EU citizens in the UK. However, the EU citizens, actually it's beyond the EU citizens, it's all the citizens from the European Economic Area, which also includes Norway, Liechtenstein, and the Swiss citizens are also included in this scheme as well. And this is a digital status, and this causes a number of problems on the employees and employers side and create some employment and recruitment issues. And of course, in addition to that as well, the EU settlement scheme is for the citizens from the European Economic Area who have been in the UK before the 30th of December 2020. So all citizens who arrived in 2021 are subject to visa applications. And again, this corresponds to the skills shortages in the business impact that we previously talked about. So what has been the Council's response and actions in relation to the EU settlement scheme and support for the citizens? So we've got a grant funding from the Home Office and working with 3 voluntary sector organisations to provide advice and guidance to citizens, to help them with their ID verifications for the application. For the complex cases, we also, our partner organisations also provide immigration advice, face-to-face advice. And of course, we have also trained our frontline staff, especially with the Children's Trust. We've done a lot of work on that to raise awareness and to make sure that all social workers are aware of the system and take the necessary actions where relevant. We have done a lot of comms activities as well, emailing 13,000 businesses across the West Midlands, sending out digital leaflets to schools and to school boards, and through all the voluntary sector organisations. The council is leading a network group with all the voluntary sector organisations and community organisations in Birmingham to have a wider outreach and overview on what's going on with EUSS and where support is needed. And so far through our project, we have helped. We have supported almost 4,000 citizens with their applications and of course with awareness raising and information sharing. And in addition to that, with all the comms activities and the seminars, we have also reached out to roughly 523 institutions, 13,000 businesses, and have also trained champions to help also within their own communities. As the Home Office has focused on digital comms, and as the EUSS is a digital status, we thought that it would be also important to reach out and raise awareness among the EU citizens who don't have access to those digital platforms. So that's why we asked for funding from the Combined Authority and led on a printed communication activity with a leaflet that was distributed to 1.2 million households in the West Midlands, and in addition to that to 523 schools and education establishments in Birmingham to make sure that they're aware of the deadline and they don't miss out on the opportunity to protect their rights. Of course, with all the EU settlement scheme, the applications, the different status levels, and the backlog of concerning the citizens who have applied but haven't got a status, the access to benefits is a big question mark and is a very, very complicated area. So we have worked closely with our teams from benefits and housing, and we also have a detailed action plan where the necessary preparations and trainings need to take place. So as you can see on this slide, so different levels of benefits require different EUSS status levels, and of course the close collaboration with DWP plays a very important role as well. As a local authority, we are also responsible for the applications and the rights of the children in care who are EU citizens. So again, with the Home Office grants, we've got a full-time person tracking and managing and coordinating all of that within the trust and liaising with the council, EUSS teams to make sure that all the children are identified and applications are submitted timely. So before the 30th of June deadline, the trust managed to submit all the applications to secure the rights of the children in care and the care leavers. But of course, this is an ongoing process, so it's not finished yet, and they will need to continue monitoring and take the necessary steps where relevant. So for the way forwards on the EU settlement scheme, even though there was a deadline, it was not a hard deadline. So the Home Office still allows late applications where where there is a justification, and this means, and again, thinking about the backlog and additional documentation that might be needed for the complex cases. So the casework is still continuing, and our support for the citizens is very relevant, and will be continuing with the new grant that we will be bidding for the new period of the project, which will be from October 2021 until the end of March 2022. And also as an organisation and an employer, of course, it is also important for us to do the necessary checks for the EEA Swiss citizens within the BCC staff, and of course also monitor the challenges for all the British employers, because it has a knock-on effect on employment and skills shortages. And again, it's a very, very important issue while we have the economic recovery challenges at the moment. Another area where we're actively working on and see a big impact is the replacement of EU funding. And so basically, if we look at the past 5 to 6 years, we see that roughly the council has been managing projects that had a total budget of roughly £100 million. And if we look at the areas that are actually key, again, for economic recovery, and such as the SME support, employment and skills, youth and career services, and transport, zero carbon and e-government. So therefore, it is very important to understand the next steps and the new funding schemes that will replace the EU funding. So there are key challenges that the move will be from the two main structures that we know very well how it works, that the mechanisms of the ESF and ERDF, shifting into the a number of different government funding schemes, such as the Levelling Up Fund, Community Ownership Fund, Welcome Back Fund, Community Renewal Fund, UK Prosperity Fund. So at the moment, we're working to understand how these new schemes work and how our internal structure should look like to make sure that we can get funding for all the priorities and strategies that the council has in place at the moment, and continue the programmes and the projects we already have. And of course, the challenges about the timelines to make sure that this new funding can replace the existing funding without any gaps. And of course, understanding the new roles of the different regional policy actors, such as the Combined Authority and the LEPs and the different government departments, the chambers, the universities, and how the new partnerships will look like. So I think this would be a good point to let you go into details where relevant, Lloyd, about the EU funding, since it's your expertise area and the way forward, how we're going to tackle those. And then maybe also you can say a couple of things about the next steps and priorities for the next 6 months. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Osgay. You'll be pleased to hear there's only, I think, 2 slides left in the deck. So apologies, Councillor Morrell, that hopefully it wasn't too much death by PowerPoint. But just a final comment on the EU funding. We're working incredibly hard with our partners across the country, but also in the region, to work with governments on the design of the new programmes to ensure that any benefits of leaving the European Union can be levered through greater devolved funding and accountability for resources to help us level up and address key business support problems and issues, employment and skills issues, etc., etc. So we're working incredibly hard to make sure that the new plethora of domestic funding opportunities serves the needs of Birmingham, its businesses and its people. Similarly, internally within the local authority, again, we're working incredibly hard to see how we can emerge with a new levelling up strategy in the local authority, and how the new domestic funding programmes can help support not just priority areas like East Birmingham, but how it can support a broader set of areas across the city. So that work will continue, and at a future update, I'm sure we'll be able to give you a little bit more on what those new funding programmes are looking like and what the positive implications can be for Birmingham. I think the final slide was more about the next steps over the coming months. I appreciate that much of what the Brexit readiness programme has done over the past 2 years has really shine a light on those challenges and issues that we have to observe and address as part of effectively what is a preparedness programme and then a response programme. So I imagine that a lot of what was presented in terms of sectoral analysis, import-export challenges, the problems in trying to make sure that all EU citizens are protected, etc., will feel like a little bit of a negative story. But moving forward, we are keen to work with partners around the city, partners internationally, to ensure that we can lever all of the contacts, connections, partnerships, relationships we have both in Europe and around the world to maximise opportunities for the city, strengthen business-to-business ties and links, try and promote business, trade and investment opportunities in the city. And we'll be levering all of those connections we have to make sure that the city doesn't stand still, but tries to profit from any new opportunities that can be levered through a new set of relationships. In the meantime, it's incumbent on ourselves to continue to monitor the impact on the council's services, continue to monitor the impact on citizens, making sure that those can move seamlessly from pre-settled status to settled status, and of course keep an economic oversight to ensure that we can lobby where necessary and help support businesses where necessary to manage the changes of leaving the European Union. So that's all from us for the time being, and we're happy to take any questions you may or clarifications that you may have.
Thank you, Lloyd and Oscar. Given that we've got potential hearing issues with the system, if I can take all the questions in one go, and then Kerry can email them over, and then we'll get an answer for them together. Yeah, Councillor Moran.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Simon Moran, Franklin Grove Park Ward, South Birmingham. Thank you for the presentation, Lloyd. Always a pleasure listening to your updates. It's a shame you're not here, but that's fair enough. And to thank you and your colleague as well for the work that you're doing. It is very prudent that we obviously prepare. And as a council, as the largest council in Europe around Brexit, in particular the work with the EU settlement scheme, I think the work you're doing is very commendable. And just to reiterate the fact that the day after the Brexit vote, we were out the Vote Leave campaign with Keisha Stewart, the former Labour MP for Edgbaston, who herself was an immigrant from the EU, and we did a survey of whether Brummies wanted to ensure that EU citizens were welcome to stay, and overwhelmingly Brummies, who voted 52% to leave, said they did. So this is something that as a city we are very passionate about, and we want to make sure that they are welcome. I can't say the same about GDPR. I do have to giggle the fact that you put a lot of work and time in the GDPR policy, because as you know, that's a piece of EU legislation that I can't stand, and frankly I think the government should repeal it and go back to the Data Protection Act. But I want to talk about the skills shortage, because that is a big problem at the moment. We're obviously all seeing it on our TV screens, and page 4 of the slide here, quite interesting at the end, the long-term changes under skills shortages. There is a correlation here between manufacturing, engineering, and you also mentioned retail, tourism, and the like. And I wanted, for me, there is a correlation between the impact of COVID there. So I think because we're not out of the woods yet, it's very, very difficult to be able to accurately measure the impacts that are happening there that are purely down to Brexit. And it's also worth mentioning as well that EU countries and Australia are also having similar problems with skill shortages, and obviously they didn't leave the European Union. In terms of growth, in terms of that, I do know that as it stands at the moment, our employment figures are growing faster than the United States, Canada, France, Italy, and Spain. There are thousands of jobs opportunities there, and it gives me an opportunity to once again plug my Frankly skill share that's happening in Frankly. So, Lloyd, if you know any providers, please do get them to come down. And finally, the questions that I have are based around the funding. You'll know that I've always talked about the European Social Fund as a stick that's been used to beat those Brexiteers over the head. I'm happy to see all of these measures that the government are introducing, the Levelling Up Fund, Community Ownership Fund, Welcome Back Fund, and there's loads of them. The question I have, though, from your standpoint, Lloyd, is I know a lot of this, you touched on it briefly, they go into other organisations like the LEP universities, but in particular the West Midlands Combined Authority. So I'd like to know what challenges that's posing your team here at the council, because you might already have schemes in place that you require this funding for, but the decision making power has been given to the Combined Authority rather than the City Council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there any more questions?
I think we may do so based on what is said. Otherwise,
So there's no question at the moment.
at the moment,
Okay.
I want to.
Thank you. We've just sent that across.
In the meantime, Chair, I'm happy to respond to the comments and the questions raised by Councillor Morell, if you would wish me to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for your words, Councillor Morell. I think I won't comment on GDPR. That's a choice as to whether you prefer to go back to the old data protection rules or whether you felt GDPR was of benefit. But with regards to skill shortages, I can wholly concur with your comments around the difficulties of being wholly sure that any skill shortages are wholly as a result of Brexit or as a result of COVID. And I think some of the biggest difficulties and the caution that we always bring forward when talking about impacts, including sectoral impacts, are that it's really difficult because of the short-term immediate issues that COVID and challenges that COVID has given us, makes it really difficult to pull the two issues apart in terms of COVID and Brexit. It's often described as a bit of a double whammy, and I think all I can suggest to the committee is if we can say that life gets back to normal and more business as usual as COVID restrictions are lifted and businesses move to that phrase, a new normal or new ways of working. It's widely understood that whilst the COVID issues were more immediate, many of the Brexit related issues, some are immediate, some will be medium term and some will be long term. But we can wholly acknowledge that that some of those issues are really difficult to separate, and we will be keeping a watching brief to see whether there is a longer legacy of ongoing challenges with regards to certain sectors, certain skill shortages that are not easing as a result of COVID. And I think particularly in some of the sectors that Ozge mentioned, whether it's social care, hospitality, retail, construction, where we've often used quite a large number of EU citizens to fill vacancies in those sectors. And of course, the ongoing stories that you hear on the news with regards to shortages of HGV drivers. So we will continue to monitor those, but we're certainly not suggesting for one moment that everything is created wholly by Brexit. With regards to growth, yes, I understand that some of the employment figures are rising, and that is very positive, and we are delighted to see that shift. But there is a harsh reality, and again, this is primarily caused by COVID rather than Brexit. We've seen in the city in the last 18 months some of the highest youth employment figures that we've had in the city since the 1980s. And this is a huge challenge for the local authority. and partners around the city to make sure that young people in particular in the city don't get left behind and they can benefit from the growth that is taking place in the city. And all of the new things, all the cranes that you see in the city, major development sites in the city, Commonwealth Games arriving next year, the arrival of HS2, it's critical that we work with our young people to make sure that they benefit from those opportunities. Which leads me on, I suppose, as a segue into the new funding opportunities. You've mentioned the European Social Fund, and that was always the primary instrument that we used in the city to not just support young people, but support adults, vulnerable adults, in terms of training, employment support, links into business growth opportunities. And we are working incredibly hard to make sure that all of the real positive features of ESF are maintained in the new future programmes, and in particular the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, that will be the key instrument that will replace EU structural funds, which is the ESF and the ERDF. So we'll be monitoring really closely, and I have a meeting next week with central government colleagues to talk about the design principles of that fund and the key features that we would like to see sustained to help us as a local authority continue to provide support to the career services, the youth services, the employment support services, the business support services. The EU funding has been a bedrock for us over many years to help put forward that provision. With regards to governance, it is clear that the government is moving towards the concept of using lead authorities in areas as a mechanism for the sort of management and distribution of new funding. Obviously, the governance will come out probably in the October autumn statement from government. So we're expecting more details later in a couple of months, maybe next month. And within that, we are somewhat expecting there to be some sort of regional governance in place within which in our area in the West Midlands, the combined authority are likely to take some sort of leadership and ownership of programmes that we would be accessing. So in terms of your direct question about what would be the key challenge for Birmingham, it would be that this doesn't end up as a competition. We would like to see that any funding formulas and allocations that are made available to areas are wholly focused on need and on data and information that is relevant to those areas of need, and that we could also perhaps benefit from what we would describe as double devolution, where funding can come straight down to local authorities, and in particular Birmingham, to allow us to continue to respond to some of these challenges as we have done for many years. So that's a watching brief, but we're hoping to influence that brief.
Okay. Thank you, Lloyd.
Thank you. Right. Is there any more questions?
Yeah, thank you. Saying, some of the Brexit, even the Prime Minister promising us that we be saving a lot of money. There's a lot of money, millions becoming X money if we come off of Euro. Have you seen any sign of that happening?
Do you have any more questions? Lloyd, I don't know if you got that.
I struggled there. Sorry, I really didn't pick up that question. Could you please repeat?
Yeah, Lloyd, what I'm asking is, during the Brexit campaign, we were promised that the UK would be better off by billions. And have you seen that money that we saved by coming out of Europe and coming to our region?
Okay, so with regards to those promises, we have pushed, for example, we have been given a commitment by government that in the context of European funding, for example, European funding was making a provision of £1.5 billion per year coming through EU structural funds that was going into the UK. The government has given a commitment that the replacement funds, so I named the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, will at least match the values that we previously had. So we are hopeful that, again, when we have the autumn budget announcement, that we'll see those figures realised. We're also hopeful in terms of it's often been criticised that many funding streams, domestic funding, European funding, will often work in silos. We would like to think that we have an opportunity through describe a plethora of new domestic funding opportunities, that if we can bring these together in a much more strategically aligned way, some of this requires national effort, some of it requires local effort, that hopefully that we can see sort of a net gain, if we can, with what we're seeking to achieve, a net gain in making sure that economic development type funding for regeneration, for businesses, for people and employment, for example, can be more strategically aligned to give us a better bang for our buck, I think would be the expression I would use. So whilst there's no evidence right now that, you know, we are financially better off as a result of leaving the European Union, you can be assured that officers will be working with governments, with partners locally and internally to try and do our best to make sure that strategic alignment gives us better value for money.
Thank you, Lloyd.
Lloyd, it's Councillor Zahir Khan, Small Heath Ward. Can you hear me, first of all?
Yes, Councillor, I can. Thank you.
That's fine. Thank you, Lloyd. What's popping up in the news, national news, and what's becoming apparent is that there's shortage in HGV drivers, as you mentioned earlier. Now, it's not clear whether that's Brexit related or COVID related. However, we have another industry in terms of farming, fruit picking as well as harvesting. And we have a lot of labor and workforce from the European Union countries, especially the Eastern European Union countries working in this industry. If we find that there is a skills shortage and this becomes a long-term issue, what is then the local government or the government's plan in place as a backup to deal with this shortage?
Okay, I fully understood the question, and whilst I cannot, and I'll allow Osgate also to come in if she has comments on this, so do feel free, Osgate. But with regards to what the government's plan B would be, where there are those specific shortages, I cannot speak on behalf of government, but what I can say about the agri sector, and you talk about food picking and fruit picking, etc., and indeed with HGV drivers, it is clear that we had an awful lot of European citizens working in those sectors. And the reality is that the new visa control system that we have in place, the immigration control system that we have in place, which is what was sort of referred to as this points-based system that Australia had adopted. Effectively, the immigration system now demands that that EU citizens come over, but with jobs on a minimum salary of, I think it's 26,500. And what's clear is that a number of occupations and sectors, particularly that demand lower skills, I would say, are not paying those salaries, and therefore it's going to, the shortages will be maintained. In some of the government's responses to issues such as HGV, the response is more about accelerating our own response to developing the skills and competencies of our own citizens to meet those job needs, to meet those vacancies. So they've accelerated programs around HGV training. They've shortened the timescales it takes to achieve those qualifications. So a lot of work has gone into that sector. However, the sector specialists have indicated that it's still going to take many months, even longer than that, to fill the vacancies. But I think it's clear that there are some specifically exposed sectors. You mentioned agri, there is retail, hospitality, where a number of EU citizens have been very who have worked in Birmingham in particular, and if we're not able to recruit local people, there will be vacancies that remain. So it's a retraining effort and it's a refocusing effort, and that's where some of our programs can support businesses and support people through sort of a job match type process. But I can't speak for the government in terms of what they would do with their visa control system if it has a perverse or adverse, sorry, not perverse, adverse effect on key sectors.
Thank you, Lloyd. I'd like to thank you on behalf of the committee. Thank you for, the presentation. We appreciate, the hard work and effort that's, gone into putting that together. So I want to thank you for that. Thanks, Lloyd, and thank you, Osby.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So if we move on to item 10 on the agenda, which is the work programme. Can I ask for members' thoughts on items for discussion for future meetings? And I'd just like to highlight the October's meeting in particular, where what would members like covered as part of the item on economic impacts on Birmingham's nighttime economy, culture, leisure, hospitality sectors in relation to the Birmingham Development Plan and residential developments, and also the COVID-19 recovery. As I understand it, the committee has previously looked at the impacts of COVID on these sectors and invited reps from the businesses. So essentially, we're looking at different perspectives.
So I think we need to include 3 days on as well, the impact that would have on the nighttime economy.
Absolutely.
I think we've got clean notes on the following month.
Yeah.
We've got clean notes on the following month. Yeah, so it's going to.
Chair, so, yeah, this was my item. I need to get I've just closed it, but I think the dates need to be changed as well because it clashes with conference season. Somebody did say, I think it says they will look into that. But it is my item because I sat in planning, and pretty much my experience on the planning committee and licensing really was to stand up for the nighttime economy. In particular, in the city centre, we are building so many properties because that's, we have a brownfield first policy, don't we? So we're shoving it all on this brownfield site in the city centre, being driven by HS2, and a lot of it's being done with no regard to the hospitality of the nighttime economy, particularly in Digbeth. The development there, which I'm not opposed to, but every time you raise objections about noise pollution and sound control, they always just go ahead with it. The officers will say it doesn't go against the Birmingham Development Plan. So the idea on the committee is to scrutinise that so that we can actually have a body of work that can potentially go to the executive and update the Birmingham Development Plan to make sure there are more safeguards in place for the nighttime economy. It's not just Digbeth, it's happened on Broad Street, it's happened in the gay village as well. So it's a big issue, and whenever I put stuff like this on social media, it always gets a lot of traction as well. So we know it's an issue. There's people out there that want to speak about it, but there hasn't actually been a body of work at council yet.
Okay. Kasima, I don't know if you can respond to that as to who we could.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in terms of the meeting on the 6th, we'll just have to look at availability of the room. I think we'd already looked at if we could get a room with Wednesday being easy. I need to look into it and come back to you.
Well, I simply won't be able to make that meeting because I'll be in Manchester.
Okay, so is there any
unless we leave it.
So what are you proposing, Councillor Morale, that we change the date of the meeting?
If we swap education portfolio, I would be at that as well. November is a good time to do it actually, because obviously the nighttime economy preps up for the Christmas and New Year season, and it also gives us much more time to put releases out and get people to come along, because we're going to want people to speak on it.
Yeah.
And also, yeah, like I say, 6th of October, I'm not going to be here. So
You're happy to move it to facilitate that and to get all the people that need to that only leaves us with the gap changes and gap brings.
Sorry, in terms of November, can I clarify something? Because I picked up an email the other day. I think the first meeting was scheduled on the 10th, which is what it says, but is that changing to 3rd?
Yeah, that was the point I was going to raise. Yeah,
So it's 3rd now.
Yeah, it is the 3rd of November. It's not the 10th. And our own paperwork. And I'll send you all the invites out so you will get all the right dates. So you just think that.
Chair, if you reach out to Councillor Francis and see if she's happy to do October. Although I do think
she couldn't make it. So
you couldn't.
that's
To be fair, I think it's probably best if that's because if I remember from the last meeting before the summer holidays, we were talking about the impact on bodies in education. And there was a report that I brought to City Council, and they said they were going to go away and look at it and have enough time to come back to committee so we can scrutinise that. So it would be beneficial actually if we've got more time.
Yeah, I
Shouldn't
mean,
we say that, but
we've got her down for 3rd of November for the 10th of the 2nd paperwork.
okay.
Yeah, it'd probably be difficult to sort of move things around. I mean, we can't. I mean, if we were to move that around. Sorry, my only concern would be then what would we have for the October? So we might be quite short notice to try and put
So
something
any
in
members
there.
got the ideas?
But there was somebody from planning and development, if the issues around buildings and
I agree.
apartments being run.
Yeah, yeah,
It's not an issue for me, but if that's something you want to discuss and raise,
Yeah,
have a discussion about.
fantastic. I think it'd be good to get members from the Not Time.
I'm actually all right with people going into city and apartments. So I think that's fine. I think we'll bring Councillor Morales, maybe somebody from, planning, regeneration and department, because Jane deals with the Jane, that's not under her portfolio, isn't it?
No,
That's
it'll be planning.
Well,
Yeah.
what we can do, what I propose is that we leave that on the agenda for the 6th, but obviously I know that Councillor Morel, that you're really passionate and you want to be part of that discussion. So what we can do is maybe look at it again, revisit it, maybe add it to the agenda where we get some speakers in on the 10th as well.
Yeah, I think we should move it to November. I think that's the perfect time for it. And in October, if we could, if any new members have got anything they want to discuss, perfect opportunity.
Meeting to October. There's some capacity on the 27th, which will be Wednesday. Yeah, the only thing is there's capacity on the 27th, but it is half term week. That'll make it the week before the next week. Yeah, that's the only problem. We then fall into having a meeting another week after. I think potentially the 13th, I think there's only one meeting on the 13th. At the moment, it's education in the morning, so unless members want to meet in the afternoon, we can leave it back a week. I don't think, is there a conference on the 13th? No. How do members feel about having
Chair.
What does everyone else feel
So
about
to put it on,
Which month is that?
This is October, so it will be the afternoon of the 13th,
It's afternoon of the 13th.
13th. That's the only alternative we have.
I've got licence and training all day.
And
The
yes,
13th of October.
I'm on that one.
Does it have to be on a Wednesday? And we change the date?
If members are in agreement, there's nothing to say you can't move the day. It's just about having this room available.
Well, I am actually, I do think we should move that till November because it's better for you'll get more people attending. And also on the October agenda, it's also got the redevelopment of Birmingham, Sheffield and surrounding areas. So it's almost like we get to talk about, the planning committee can come and talk about what's happening, development of that area. And then the following committee, you have people from the Not-Time coming in those areas, talking about the impact it's having on them. So then we get 2 full committees where we actually get a good body of information and content. And then we can make a decision.
It might be positive.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm not totally against the development. It just needs to be disproportionate. There was one development where one side, I literally said, if the one side of it was right opposite club, if that was all retail, I would vote for it, but it's not. You just shoehorning all these properties in right next to the club.
Trust me,
Okay, so I think what the most sensible thing is to do is if we take it away and we have a look at what dates, what we can do, because obviously we can go on forever trying to, so what we'll do is we'll take it away, we'll come back with something, with members and we'll send something.
I don't mind afternoon meetings. I think the reason why, let me explain, the reason why we had morning meeting was because we had a number of members. We had a councillor.
Yeah.
We had a number of members who had child money commitments, etc. So that's why we had in the mornings to avoid afternoons. But I don't mind an afternoon. I know you're okay with afternoons.
Yeah. That's fine, yeah. So what we'll do is we'll look at it and then we'll come back to you.
Previously, we avoided afternoon meetings for that reason, because
Yeah.
people are, some of the members are children.
Yeah, I'm more happy we're going to have some meetings on.
Okay,
But we need to be mindful of the schedule for the
Yes.
meetings
Yeah.
because of the streaming, so we'll take it.
Yeah, we'll see.
Is this the only room? for
Yes.
committee?
Yeah. And Wednesday.
Can't you online with him?
What's happening with the committee rooms over the Margaret Street? You know, on the first floor?
I think they have streaming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the only.
yeah, I think.
Sorry, I wasn't there. Does this get recorded?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's live, it's
Yeah.
live.
So if we move on to the, sorry, the next slide, because we can go on forever about this. So if we move on, as we agreed, we'll have a look at it and get back to you on what's possible. So we move on to the next item on the agenda.
Yeah, just sorry, I've just got to leave a little bit early. Sorry.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. So if we move on to item 11, which is a request for call-in, any petitions, are there any requests for call-ins?
No.
No? Item 12, any other urgent, is there any urgent business?
I did have some, but I totally forgot what it was. So I
Okay.
feel no.
Is it that urgent? Okay.
It's not that urgent.
Yeah, it's not.
Right. So item 13, authority to chairman and officers to act, do you have the authority to act between meetings?
Agreed.
Thank you all for coming and look forward to seeing you on the 6th of October or whenever.
I'll be